Yes, so hello everyone. Thank you also again, Ursula, for the introduction. I would just like to introduce myself as well. So my name is Martin Klimza. I am a lecturer in the Museum of Victims of Communism in Košice, in Slovakia. I'm a historian, lecturer. I've studied history in the UK, and now I've been working here for 4 years as a lecturer, mainly for secondary students, but also later years of primary schools. So in today's webinar, I would like to share with you basically what the samizdat is, some of my experiences from teaching these school groups, which hopefully will help you as well. Maybe some of you, I've seen that maybe some of you from Slovakia who joined maybe were in the museum already. So you will hopefully learn how to take what you've seen in the museum into your classroom as well. So generally, we will be speaking about three main areas. I divided it into historical and cultural context. Then there will be the pedagogical approaches that Ursula already mentioned. And then I've also prepared some maybe how to implement it into the classroom itself, and maybe some challenges that I've come across in my experience with teaching various groups of students and various yeah from various years, so various age groups. That's the word. So speaking about the historical and cultural context, I've seen in the chat that we have a very diverse group of people from many countries. So firstly, we have to ask ourselves, what is samizdat? Or rather, I would like to ask you, first of all, you can either raise your hand in the webinar or maybe type in the chat yes or no, that have you ever heard the term samizdat? Or maybe have you come across it in some books or sometimes in your teaching as well? And if I could ask Ursula to then tell me the results.
No, now there is like 2 yes and 4 no.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so mostly, so yes, some is something that is really interesting. At least for me. I mean, I haven't heard the term before I started working here, even though I've studied history as well. So samizdat basically comes from the Russian word to samoizdat or samoizdatelstvo, which means self-publishing, right? Or to self-publish. That's the general, probably the most general description of samizdat that I could give you. Uh, I've come across as well in Poland, certainly in the 1980s, that there is a term for it called drugi obieg, or the second circuit of these literary works. So generally, when speaking about samizdat, we are speaking about underground self-publishing under censorship. Of course, that's the most important thing, that these samizdats were uncensored or non-censored. As I said, there are many different definitions of what samizdat is. I've come across another one from a Russian dissident called Vladimir K. Bukovsky, which is a bit, let's say, funny in quotation marks, but it really showcases the reality of what these samizdat creators especially had to go through. And Bukovsky describes samizdat as I write it myself, I edit it myself, I censor it myself, I publish it myself, I distribute it myself, and I spend time in prison for it myself as well. Because of course, as you will see, and what is really important is that these samizdats were prohibited in these countries that were in the Eastern Bloc. When speaking about the types of samizdat, we are basically dealing with four main types, which are the periodical samizdats, the book samizdats, audio and video samizdats, which are sometimes together, but I've divided it into separate types. So firstly, when speaking about the periodical samizdat, that was the most widespread type of the samizdats. Here on these photographs, you can see different examples of these samizdats. Rodinné spoločenstvo and Zrno, that's the Slovak samizdats that were coming out here. And there you also see some examples of Polish samizdats, mainly Kultura, which was probably the most well known. Most of these were coming out not as often as normal censored newspapers during this time. Usually they were coming out quarterly, so every 3 months. As I said, they were uncensored, which is really, really important. And it gave people courage, which we'll talk about more later. But basically, it gave people courage to speak up and to know that somewhere outside of their own vicinity, there are people who actually want to fight against the regime and who want to and who have the same ideas that can't really be expressed in mass media, in officially allowed media. Then when speaking about book samizdats, we are talking about either translated works from other languages, or we are speaking about original works that were written in original languages, Slovak, Polish as well, Hungarian as well. Most of all, these books are not as popular and not as widespread as the periodical samizdats, mostly because they were time consuming. They needed to be written usually on a typewriter. So it could take up to, let's say, 3-4 months to actually write a book like that, and then another couple, maybe even a month to copy it, right, and to put it into more prints. However, these book samizdats were really necessary, and that is because, as you will see, the communist regime, as with every totalitarian regimes, a very famous one is the Nazis who burned books, the burning of the books. The same happened here in the communist regime. And I would also like to ask you, maybe guess in the chat, how many books were actually destroyed by the communist regime? I know the value and I know the figure for Slovakia. So try and guess how many books were destroyed in Slovakia by the communist regime. And again, Ursula, if you could tell me the results, please.
A million. There is a guess. But just wait. Let's wait for 600,000.
Good guesses so far. Students usually guess in the thousands. So
yeah, they get in the thousands.
1,000.
Okay. There's a point, but it's Stefan, it's like 50,000.
50,000. Okay.
No, you mean 500,000. That's what I thought. 500,000. Okay. And copies or titles?
Copies. That's copies. Actually.
No. I would say that less. I would say 200,000.
So, but general, we are speaking about, or your guesses were in the hundreds of thousands, right, of copies. Well, I lied a bit because I don't actually know the value for the whole period, but I know the value for the 1950s, which was the harshest communist period here in Slovakia. And during that period, it was actually 27.5 million books. So a lot more than you've guessed. Even students are sometimes very, very surprised by the sheer amount of books that were destroyed. So that's why, as I said, it was really necessary to actually produce samizdat books, because there were none, right? That could be read, that could be actually read, that wouldn't be, let's say, propagandist or saying stuff that the regime would want to hear. So how would these books actually get here is one interesting fact, and we are coming a bit into the international aspect of the samizdat, because of course the most important and the most famous way was smuggling these books, right? There's no internet, you couldn't download it, so the only way to do it is to actually smuggle it across the border. And there's really a good example of the German-Polish-Slovak cooperation that was happening during this time, because as you see on that map, is actually all these books that were printed from all around Western Europe and taken to Munich, and then from Munich they were taken through the sea, through Poland, through the whole of Poland, and actually across the High Tatras to Slovakia. There were many groups of people that smuggled these books across the border. Here you see just one of them, the photo on the right, on the bottom right, which is a very famous group called Borovsky, Gabay, and Konz. That's their names, and they were smuggling in the Tatras regions, but there were ones in Orava region, which is the northwest of Slovakia, also in the northeast, right? So all around the border regions with Poland. Their story is really interesting because through their amount of, or through their time smuggling books, they were able to smuggle up to 6 to 7 tons of books. They specifically, so each group could smuggle as much, and they were smuggling for about 2 years. They were always going in backpacks. They were backpacking, trekking across the mountains, and basically one backpack could have about 82 kilograms of books inside it. Unfortunately, with this specific group, they were caught in December 1983, and they actually spent some time in Polish prisons. As you can see, this is from Novi Sad. And then they were sentenced actually for smuggling these books, for distributing them to priests and to other people, for a year and a half in Slovak prisons, right? So it was very dangerous for these people to actually go and smuggle these books and to get these books that weren't here to their friends, to their families, and basically to other people who would like to read them. So these are just some of the examples that I've managed to find. The one on the left is actually the one that we have here in our museum. This is a translation from a Polish original, and this is actually religious exercises in Vatican from someone who you might know, Cardinal Karol Wojtyla, or as you may know him better, the Pope John Paul II, of course. And so this is just one of the examples of the translations that were happening, right? When the books were smuggled here, there were translations done. And the one on the right, sorry, is probably more famous. This is a book by George Orwell, 1984, which was, of course, prohibited. It was not allowed in the Eastern Bloc, definitely. And this is from an English original, and this was done in 1979 in Paris, right? But this was actually printed in Polish and then smuggled and taken to Poland. So, moving on, we are speaking about audio samizdat as well. Audio samizdat was basically foreign or national. We have these two distinctions. Foreign was, of course, foreign radio stations. The most important ones were Voice of America and Radio Free Europe, which were the most popular one, of course. They were very heavily jammed at this time by jammers, by Soviet jammers. I actually, interestingly, live near to one of these former Soviet jammers of the radio, and we still have bad radio signal where I live, actually, because of that jam. And but these radios are mostly prevalent in border regions, especially on the south of Slovakia, either with the border with Hungary or near Bratislava, where you have a border with Austria, right, where you can actually get these radio waves coming more clearly, and they're a bit harder to jam. Right. When it comes to national audio samizdats, there we are talking about either songs or anything that would be created here that we wouldn't be able to get normally. So musicians that weren't allowed to be published officially would have to, if they wanted to put something out, they would have to do it in samizdat form, right? So audio samizdat. And then quite interestingly, we have a video samizdat as well, which in our context, we are talking about dubbing of foreign films, which were also smuggled the same way as books. That's why they are usually dubbing from German, but not dubbing as we know now. It was mostly interesting. It was mostly basically sort of what we call audio description now. So one actor or actress basically talked over every voice and voiced every character. What would happen then is then you would get it on a VHS tape, and you would organize watch parties, right, in your house, where you would get 20, 30 people to watch a movie with you. And you had to be quite careful because you didn't know whether someone from that group isn't, for example, a secret agent of the secret police, right? So you really had to trust these people who you were getting these movies for. And these are just some examples of the movies that were dubbed from German, actually by the director of our museum, Mr. Pavel Haritz. Right. So these are just the types of samizdat that we kind of differentiate, but generally samizdat could be divided into religious samizdats, which were mostly, let's say, the easter it went, the more religious it got, right? So they were speaking about religion, they were speaking about religious themes that couldn't be actually printed normally in official newspapers. And you also have what's called a secular samizdat, which would be, as you move further and further west, you would get more and more secular samizdats. And there you would get essays, for example, like you see on the bottom left, Václav Havel and the Power of the Powerless, which is one of the most famous essays from him. Then you have prose, which is basically what do you have on the bottom right, sorry. This is The Animal Farm by George Orwell, again translated into Polish. And then you would also get literary plays by Havel and by many other playwrights that weren't able to play them normally. So you had variations across countries, of course. It was not always the same. I've managed to basically get two clear, let's say, differentiations between Tygodnik Solidarność and Náboženství a súčasnosť, or religion and now, which were, let's say, the two main forms of rebellion against the regime in the form of newspapers. Tygodnik Solidarność, of course, it was an official newspaper of the anti-communist unions. For the first issue of it was actually in 500,000 prints. So it was a huge way of actually printing these newspapers. The newspaper started in April 1981. It was prohibited in December of 1981 when the martial law began in Poland, but then it was restarted in 1989, and it has still been printed to this day. And it's a very famous one nowadays. We've actually had the editor-in-chief here in the museum a couple of years back. When it comes to religion and today, this was actually censored. It was published in secret. It was uncensored. This was published in secret. And for the first issue, you can see that it was actually 500 prints, 500,000. So it was really a different amount that was circulated between these people. Religion and Now started in June 1982, so just shortly after Tygodnik Solidarność. It was published until 1990, but then it was discontinued since there was no need for it anymore because there were other newspapers that fulfilled its role much better, basically, right? Because you had the uncensored newspapers that could be officially published, so you didn't need this very hard job of publishing this newspaper in secret. Okay, you might be thinking, what is the actual relevance for today? You see, the main issue, the main idea that we are working with is, of course, censorship. It was very widespread during the communist era here in Slovakia and all throughout the Eastern Bloc. And I would like to ask you, maybe with today, which countries would you find censorship in today? What do you think? Again, you can write in the chat, and then maybe Ursula, if you could tell me the answers. So what do you think? Which countries would you find censorship in today?
Russia and Belarus.
Yep. They're the two main ones. Yeah.
And China, Afghanistan.
Yep.
Tajikistan.
Sure.
Venezuela.
Yep. Good point. Yep. So more or less you are basically on the same page. I've also found Cuba being one basically. Yeah, so basically we have North Korea, which is also very famous, of course, very
There is
important.
on
China,
chat too. Yeah.
yeah, so North Korea, China, Russia, Cuba, Belarus, these are probably the most famous ones. If you look at these, they have one thing in common, and basically they are mostly communist or post-communist countries where some sort of authoritarian regime still exists, right? In Belarus, for example, shortly after the war in Ukraine started, I've seen an article that the book that I mentioned, 1984, was actually outlawed again, which speaks volumes to what the regime in Belarus is. Yes, so basically, first of all, we still see censorship today, so there is a big need to talk about censorship and how people fought against censorship in the past. But also very interesting is that the Samizdat was about building a community between these people and a sense of fighting the good fight, as I've called it, right? So what you see here, just normal, ordinary people. You might pass them on the streets and you would think nothing of them, but these are actually the people who published these samizdats in secret, right? These are the editorial teams, the first editorial in the middle and the second one on the left, basically, of the newspaper Religion and Now. And here on the bottom right, you see how basically the whole country was intertwined, basically a web of these people who cooperated into delivering these samizdats into every piece of the country. Right? The central distribution was in Bratislava, but what happens is that in Bratislava, you get the usually students who are in the late 70s, studying universities, and they are basically these communities that are building between these people who already are working with the samizdats. They are building a community with these students, and these students then come back and actually they basically get back into their own cities, into their own villages, and they build their own communities, right? So it's really an interesting way of building these communities that you have to trust, of course, because it's very dangerous to deal with these outlaw things during the communist era. And there is also, again, as I said, the sense of fighting the good fight, right? Many times they're actually scared because they could go to prison, but it's sort of the good anxiety that you have of actually doing something that you know is worth it, but it's very dangerous, right? And you want to keep doing it even though it's very dangerous. And basically, when I should summarize why it's really interesting and why it's relevant for today, and these are basically some of the keywords that I pointed out, is that the Samizdat was about finding the courage to fight for freedom by the truth and without violence. That's very, very important. What you see below is are photos from basically one of the biggest protests that happened in Bratislava in 1988. It's called the Candle Manifestation because of tens of thousands of people who gathered on this square in Bratislava with candles in their hands. And they were basically praying and singing religious songs, mainly praying for religious freedoms, but also human rights. The response of the regime was to actually send policemen to basically round them up. They sprayed water hoses from water trucks, fire trucks, as you can see on the top right. And many people were arrested. Some of them were actually run over. Nobody died, but there were people actually injured during this protest, right? So as you see, there is courage, there's fight for freedom, there's truth, and it was done without violence from the side of the protesters and those who created these samizdats. Right. So that's basically the general overview of what samizdat was. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them in the Q&A session afterwards. But let's move into the pedagogical approaches. And as Ursula said, I've basically divided it into three approaches. We have the archival or document approach, we have the material culture approach, and the comparative or civic approach. You'll see what I mean by each of them as we move on. So the archival or document approach that you see here is mostly using really, archival documents, digitized samizdat sources that are accessible, that are available, freely available actually. I've highlighted three sites that I use and I use during my research. Samizdat.sk, which house digital samizdats from Slovakia. You have all the samizdats that were being printed in Slovakia. Then you have Scriptum, which is a Czech site. It is basically operated by Libri Prohibity in Prague. But you have also some Latvian summits, that's the Czechs, not just Czech, but and also very interesting, let's say, context about what summits that was, what each summit that meant for these people, who was in the editorial. So it's really thorough, this scriptum page. And then you have the Blinken OSA archives, Archivum, which is mostly for Hungarian sources, but I've also found digitized versions of Russian summits that's there. So it's really thorough as well. But it's more of an archive than a digital kind of website and digital source, right? So why are these the archives and documents really interesting? Well, firstly, for example, during your literature classes, you can focus on analyzing text, as you've seen, like proper text from the era. You can see what do they focus on, because mostly each summit that was focused on on a different side of of ordinary life, let's say like that. You can see what troubled ordinary people, right? Because those are the people who wrote it and who it was written for, right? It wasn't written for a president. It wasn't written for for some international relations. It was ordinary people whose lives basically you see in these samizdat. And also, and I mentioned on and I've touched up on that, that, during these history lessons, you usually see the high history being done, right? So you see the kings, you see the Cold War, right? Reagan versus Gorbachev, or these kind of really high history. What is really missing sometimes, and I've noticed it in these students, is that they miss the ordinary lifestyle, how these people lived, how what were their troubles, what are the things that they wondered about in these lives, right? And you can see that clearly in these samistats, right? Whether it was religion or whether it was, for example, the green exam, which is ecology, right? Which is something that was also quite interesting because of the heavy industrialization that was done during this period of the communist era in the Eastern Bloc. Also, with these archival documents and the archival document approach, and this is basically what you'll be getting as well as in one of your teaching resources, is you can find articles in censored or pro-regime newspapers and comparing the narratives with uncensored or foreign newspapers, right? You'll actually be getting a censored version or censored narrative of the protest that I mentioned, the candle manifestation, and you see here on the top, it's called the bubble of provocation has popped. So it's really about the provocation, about these people provoking the regime and provoking the violence that was happening. However, when you see, for example, the New York Times, which reported on this was one of the first protests that was reported on wide throughout the world, actually, from the Eastern Bloc. You have the Czechoslovak police dispersed Catholics at the rally, which is more true to what actually happened. And during these teaching resources, you also see the uncensored version, which from Samizdat publishings, which you can also basically go through with your students and see what they focused on, what was the narrative they wanted to give to people. So moving on to material culture approach, as I've called it. Basically, this is depending on what you actually have available during your lessons, but because we in the museum have a wide array of typewriters, I've seen that especially younger students, they really want to touch history and they really want to touch these, have something to work with, right? And typewriters are excellent with that because they make sounds, they are really loud, they can bash them really hard, so it's really something they can get their teeth into. And if you have some available in your school or maybe at home as well, I've seen teachers that have typewriters at home. You can use it quite well. Also, you can make carbon copies if you have some indigo papers. You could show the students actually that there was no Control C, Control V as we see now, or no AI, but they had to type it out word by word. And if you have some mistakes, you basically have to throw the whole page out, right? So this is something that they can't really understand unless they see it firsthand. So if you have these typewriters available, I would really encourage you to use them in your lessons. Also, interestingly, is you can show these constraints, right? Because of course you don't have as much freedom as you have with, for example, Microsoft Word or something. But here you actually have these constraints as creativity, right? Because you, for example, you are creating artwork on these pages with dots and dashes and various letters, right? That you actually have to use to create an artwork of a cross or an artwork of a dove, right? Which I've seen on these samizdats. And basically, it's this approach is designed to really make them think about the process, right? The creative process that went into these samizdats. Let's say you need, these samizdats were done in thousands of prints. So as I've said, hundreds of thousands in some cases. So you really need, just the paper that you need, the millions of pages of paper that you need. How would you get them? When everything is watched and is under the watch of the communist regime, right? So you will need someone in the paper shop who would sell you this paper. Then how would you get it to your home, right, without being stopped by the police? So these are all the things that they also don't think about unless they see it firsthand. So this is something that really works, and I've had it work quite a lot during my workshops that I've done with students. And this is basically, firstly, I've had it as a separate approach, but I've kind of joined it with the material because I've told about the classroom simulations, right? This is also something that we've tried during our lessons. As you can see on these photos, is actually comprised various pages of one samizdat, and we tried creating our own, right? It was done by basically hand binding this samizdat, which was done just by putting it all together with either pins or let's say one of these. I'm not sure how it's called in English. And so this is something that you can do quite easily, and it really shows how time consuming it was and how hard it was to actually work something like this out and how to put it all together. You can create distribution networks across series of classes, across series of teachers if you maybe join together with another class, and role plays, which are really interesting. I've seen one exercise where you are trying to create these hand binded samizdats, but you assign basically you tell the whole class that between them is one or two secret agents. And basically, you divide them into three groups. And if anyone has a secret agent in their group, they will get a bad mark, right? In quotation marks. And you can see that they really, are really distrustful of each other, and they try to maybe shun everyone around, and the whole atmosphere changes in the class. And at the end, you actually reveal that there was no one. There was no secret agents among these people. It was just the thought of it that really makes the people uneasy, right? And the anxiety that it creates, which is also something that you can actually make them feel, which is really important, right? Because of what these people have to felt every time they create these samizdats. And as I said, your students can create their own mini samizdats based on the resources that you have available in your school or during your classrooms. And finally, we have what's called the comparative or civic approach, which goes into more, let's say, broader themes. I basically tried to go into the present day Since we are a private museum, we have a bit more freedom in what we can actually talk about. So I'll leave that to you with your classrooms and how far you want to actually go. But what I've seen and what I've talked about is the past censorship versus present day digital dissent and freedom of expression. It's a bit connected to what Ursula showed at the front with as the first mural that you've seen. But basically, we were asking what fulfills the role of Samizdat today, right? This is what you are trying to get through to these students. And first of all, on the left, you see basically instructions for press, radio, and television in September 1968, shortly after the invasion of the Warsaw Pact in Czechoslovakia, which is also one of the teaching resources you will be getting, how it actually works and what censorship actually means during that time. And that is basically, it shows that you should not publish anything that could be interpreted as criticism of the Soviet Union, Poland, East Germany, Belarus, Hungary, and communist parties in these countries, right? On the right side, you basically have examples of what samizdat could mean or what could it be today. On the bottom right, you have one mural by Banksy, which is in the Royal Court of Justice in London, which showcases basically really clearly the state of the society today. On the top right, you have a very famous case that is quite recent, with Stephen Colbert being cancelled by the network CBS days after criticism of the settlement with the American President Donald Trump. Are these people, do these freedom of expressions actually mean that there is some censorship in these countries? Do they fulfill the role of Samizdat? Are they actually talking to the people about what the people want to hear, but just can't hear from the official sources? And by the way, this Banksy mural was actually taken down already, right? So it really shows you the power of what these murals and what these images can have. Also connected to these comparative civic approaches are simple questions of why does speaking the truth matter? Why is truth dangerous in a totalitarian regime? Right? We are asking these questions to these students because it really nowadays they can't really imagine not being able to speak whatever they want, right? And for them the truth is, let's say, it's relative. The truth, it's really something that they talk about all the time. But why is it so important? Why is it so dangerous? And the danger to the totalitarian regime is quite interesting in that it is really something that erodes it from the inside, right? Because as soon as you lose fear in these totalitarian regimes, you basically they have no longer power over you, and you can try and protest. You can actually you don't have to fear that someone will come and arrest you because you are speaking the truth, and you know that there are other people who are actually with you. And I also chose one quote from Milan Rufus, a Slovak poet, and he says that when the time comes that you cannot tell the truth, at least say that you actually couldn't tell it, right? Which is quite interesting, that even though there is some censorship, you should definitely try and tell that was some censorship and you couldn't actually say what you wanted to say. So coming back to the relevance for today, right? I might have strayed a bit off topic, but not really, because we are still talking about the four key words that I've talked about, right? It's about courage, it's about fight for freedom, it's about the truth, and it's about no violence connected to these shows of opposition. And we are basically coming to the last part, and that's the classroom implementation and challenges that I've seen from my experience working with these students. First of all, some pitfalls to avoid. I've called it pitfalls. First is the romanticization of this samizdat. You can really delve into these people being heroes and these people fighting for freedom and fighting for their lives and escaping police by the skin of their teeth. But it's really not that grand as maybe we would like to imagine, because what you see that is also, as I said, it was ordinary people, and it was part of their lives. It was part of their ordinary lives. What you see on the left is basically one ordinary life. This is a house which belonged to Mr. Peter Murza. He was an editor-in-chief of one of these Samizdat newspapers. And in his house, he actually created a secret underground printer, which is on the bottom right. And there you see a blueprint of how it actually worked. He had a cellar, and they dug a tunnel through this cellar, and that went into this underground printer, right? And he sat on it. He owned the house. There was also a central warehouse in this house. So he really sat on a minefield, let's say it like that, right? But it wasn't like he always feared for his life. It was really something that was ordinary for him. The people who worked in this printer actually said that they were coming to work. They were coming from work. They got these addition plans. They got these backgrounds, these resources, and basically they were printing until 4 a.m. They had some sleep, and then they went to work at 6, right? So it was really ordinary. They couldn't actually be seen because it would be too visible and too dangerous. Right? But also, it's interesting that you shouldn't treat Samizdat as marginal, because it was really something that was central to life under communism and to the fight against communism. Samizdat is actually also in the UNESCO Foundation, and UNESCO itself says that it is really it's some evidence that some fight actually happened, right, against this communism. So it was really crucial, but really ordinary, which is kind of the beauty of it all. And also, basically, how should you adapt for different age groups? I'm not sure if you are all secondary school teachers, but I've had students who are 12, students who are 16, and also I had students who are at university who are 22, 23, right? So different ways of approaching, the different approaches work for different age groups. For example, you see these younger students that mostly respond well to these material cultures, touching things. Then you also see the older students who respond best, in my opinion, to these archival and document approaches. They can actually delve into the meaning of it and actually learn to digest the document and analyze it properly. And people who are, let's say, voting age or over, so 18 years old and over, you can really go into these civic approaches, into these comparative civic approaches, right? About these grander ideas and about these more abstract terms. And why voting? Because what I get quite often from what I get quite often from my students is that why should we learn and actually care about what was happening 50, 60 years ago and doesn't happen now, right? There is no samizdat, there is nothing basically going on today. And I always say that because it affects us to this day, right? This, for example, is the German election results in 2025. And for those who know, Germany was actually divided into East and West during the communist era. And you can still see it to this day. Even actually, if you see, even Berlin is actually divided into the East and the West part. Still not officially, of course, but the ideas and the mindset of the people is definitely different between these former countries, right? Also quite interesting. Yep.
Martin, we're just running out of time a little bit, so
Yep.
Could you
It's
close up
the
in
final slide.
maybe? Yeah.
It's the final slide, don't worry.
Thank you.
So yeah, so also why you should care about this is that what I've also used quite often is that some people, and especially for example in Slovakia, they don't really think that it was a totalitarian regime, and there is a huge nostalgia towards this regime. 45% of people actually think that socialism in Czechoslovakia was not a totalitarian regime and human rights were respected. This is from a survey from 2018, right? So we should really care about what was happening, even though nowadays it really isn't being published anymore, or you can say whatever you want or publish what you want. But it is really interesting and important to again talk about these things. And also, there is a huge amount of interdisciplinarity, right? We can talk about it in literature, of course, but also religious studies with religious samizdat, in history, in how it all affected, in art history, right? With these, with the art forms or the you have to create with dots and dashes, and of course in civics with the broader themes that you have. Right? So really, we are still talking about the courage to fight for freedom, about the truth, and doing it with no violence, which is the most important thing. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Martin. It's not the end, even though it's 6:02. It's not the end. It's still 28 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Martin, for this very well structured, very well presented presentation. And I really value how you talked about like the community and trust, and also this international aspect. And I'm already looking forward for the teaching resources you're gonna receive, because, for example, there is this exercise when they got like coverage of an event from official media, from Samizdat, and from foreign press, and then they receive instructions from censorship and nowadays coverage of the event, and they need to censor themselves. So I think that's a really great example. There's also a movie about Slovak resistance, this guy who are smuggling through Tatras. This is really like very meaningful story. So I'm really really curious what you, the teachers, are going to do with that. And we're waiting for, as I said at the beginning, we're waiting for you to tell us how you address that in your lesson. Now, using my power as a host to change the agenda a little bit, we're gonna move to Gabor. And Martin, it's your time to drink water and just rest for a little bit. Gabor, we're gonna present you with our project, our ENRS's Freedom of Speech Beyond Borders. And then during the last 10 minutes, there will be finally time for questions to Gabor or Martin, and just think about your questions. And I'll give the floor to Gabor.
Yeah, thank you very much for this introduction. I try to share my screen. Do you see it, my presentation?
We can see your, yeah, that's cool. The full screen, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So now I would like to very briefly introduce our project, which is entitled Freedom of Speech Beyond Borders. It's a brand new project which we implemented this year. And we were really excited about that. Yeah, freedom of speech beyond borders is a partly archival, partly historical, and partly artistic educational project. It focuses on the struggle against censorship and on the struggle for freedom of speech in the 20th century and nowadays. And the idea was that we take an international group of university students to archives where documents related to the history of freedom of speech are preserved. And in these archives, the students get to be familiar with a whole variety of uncensored Samizdat publications, but they were also given the opportunity to conduct interviews with former dissidents and human rights activists. And after the students come across these documents and did their own research, they could reflect on their own experiences by artistic means. So in short, the project rests on three elements: exploring archives, interviewing former witnesses, and conducting artistic activity. And this year we decided to go to Bremen and Prague in a parallel way with two groups of students, and to reunite them in Maison Lafitte. As far as Bremen is concerned, we visited the Research Center for East European Studies. This institution has a wonderful Samizdat archive, including collections of Polish, Czech, German, Hungarian, and Soviet Samizdat texts, but not only. You can also find there documentation of the mail art movement, and also items related to nonconformist artists. And in Prague, we visited two different institutions, Libri Prohibity, which is a huge collection of Czech and Slovak samizdats. And we also visited Václav Havel Library, an institution which is devoted to one of the most important dissident figures during the Cold War era. And after 5 days in Bremen and Prague with the students, we met in Maison Lafitte at the outskirts of Paris in France. In Maison Lafitte was the center of the Polish emigre culture, where a very important Polish emigre figure, Jerzy Giedroyć, edited and published, among others the Kultura journal, which was shown already, which has been shown already by the previous presenter. And what did we do in the archives? On the basis of archival documents, samizdat documents, students had to resolve research tasks focusing on topics as what were the most important characteristic of the samizdat publications, what kind of topics were discussed in unofficial publications, how did the life of samizdat activists and dissidents look like, what kind of forms of state repression dissidents had to face, and what was the antidote for that, so how they could avoid being harassed by the police. And in these archives, of course, we cooperated with local experts who knew the best their collection and the context for it. And thanks to their help, we were able to pre-select some documents and archival materials and prepare a whole educational program for the students for this couple of days. And what is important that we also paid attention on the materiality of samizdat text. So I would say that we use this material cultural approach, which was which has been already mentioned today. And we did it in order to see, on the one hand, the fragility of these documents, but also to see the underground creativity which is behind them. And we also wanted to show the students how much human effort it takes to type entire novels on a single typewriter, and how much human effort it takes to produce 5 copies in a day or two using a typewriter, which was the most important technical tool for uncensored literature during the Cold War era. We also paid a special attention to familiarizing students with typewriters and letting them try them out. And as part of this exercise, students had to write a story. For example, this is already how we practiced writing on a typewriter. So students had to write a story in such a way that we divided them into 2 groups. Each group received the same opening sentence, and the members of each group had to add 1 sentence each by typewriting. And it was really funny, like what kind of stories we got at the end. It was a kind of warming up or ice-breaking exercise. But later on, the students also had to imitate the creation of some samizdat publications by listening to a short excerpt from a former broadcast of Radio Free Europe. And they had to create a short news on the basis of this radio program, make a transcription, and then each student had to prepare a copy of the same text. And it was a kind of basis to discuss their experiences and discuss like what are the advantages and disadvantages of the typewriter technique. And we were also able to see the textual variability, which characterized very much samizdat culture. And we saw like how each copy differed from the previous one. So it was an interesting exercise. In the archives, yeah, this is like just a short fragment of this exercise. And what is important that in the archives, the students, our students also conducted interviews, which allowed them to get answers to questions that could not be answered by the documents themselves, such as asking about feelings, for example, emotions, what it was like in prison, whether the person in question felt fear, how they now view their actions at the time and their activity in the 1980s, for example. And we also met with human rights activists who talked about what it is like to work as a journalist, for example, when they want to write a report on Belarus or Russia, what information channels are available to them nowadays, how to fact check this information, and so on, so on. So we try to bridge the gap between the past and the present. And these interviews were prepared and conducted by the students themselves. We just gave them documents and assistance if they needed. And after the research, students attended artistic workshops and tried to process their experiences on an artistic level. So just let me show some artistic exercises that students had to do during this project. I think that some of them will be overlapping with what Martin was speaking about beforehand. Yeah, each method is basically based on this do-it-yourself approach. So one of the exercises was about mail art postcards, and this task consisted of 4 parts. In the first part, we gave the students a historical background, so a kind of short introduction. What was mail art? Why was it an important art movement? Then in the second part, it was about inspiration. So we put on the table mail artworks in reproductions, so students could come across them and get inspired. In the third part, they had to prepare their own postcard using this do-it-yourself method. So a postcard in which everything had to be designed by them. Usually these postcards had a textual message, so the recipient should be a real person from the other group, and they could write to this person anything, just sending greetings from Prague or Bremen archives, or just ask questions or articulate their experiences, or make some statements about Samizdat, anything. It was up to them totally. And they also had to create the graphic design of these postcards. And at the end, each postcard had to be delivered to someone. So each student offered someone a postcard and received one. And we used it as a kind of practice to integrate the our two parallel group of students with each other. And I think it went really well, and they were really like very interested in such kind of practical approach. They really like that. We had also a very similar exercise, which was about Samizdat book covers. And the very beginning, we did the same, like in the case of the mail art postcards. So we put on the table plenty of Samizdat publications with very interesting cover design or very interesting materials. You see one example on my slide, a Samizdat publication, which was made using a jeans. And each student had to choose one particular Samizdat cover and present it to the others, answering to such a questions like why this cover is appealing for you, what is the quality of the cover, what kind of materials it is made of. And then after this kind of inspiration and presentation session, they had to imagine that a dictator takes power in their country and censorship is introduced and their favorite book is banned. And they had to create a Samizdat cover design for this book. It could be it was their choice what kind of book will be the basis for this exercise. For them, it can be a novel, a prose, poetry, academic work, whatever. And they had to design this cover only using Samizdat tools, which means typewriter, carbon papers, drawing by hand or painting, and so on. And this task usually took an hour and a half, but there was also one comprehensive artistic task during the project, and this is my final point, because the main outcome of the whole project was a contemporary Samizdat publication, a kind of collaborative zine in which students could reflect on their own experiences in an uncensored way, to express freely themselves, to experiment with various techniques, and to use their creative energy. So it is something similar to Martin's approach, that the students prepared their own mini Samizdat. However, we called it as a contemporary Samizdat journal. And in this way, they could engage in activity which was really similar to the Samizdat production. And in these Samizdats they could use the same techniques which were used for Samizdat publication. At the beginning of the projects, students received a special notebook in which they documented their thoughts, reflections. They also collected materials every day. So this kind of diary contained interview experts, quotes from books, drawings, cut out graphic elements, photos, and so on. And that was the basis for the zine making process, because after the archival work, the students participated in various workshops. They were introduced to the very exciting and very heterogeneous world of the zines and the basics of zine making. And in separate workshops, with the help of a mentor, they discussed their experiences and identified the topics which they were interested the most. As far as I remember, 5 or 6 groups were formed and created, and each group worked on a different topic. And it took, like, as far as I remember, 2 days to prepare. Of course, attend these artistic workshops and go through this whole mentoring process and create by hand these zine publications. And I think that the outcomes were really excellent. So I just want to show you one zine which was about the role of women in the dissident movement, highlighting this kind of grave work which had to be done in the movement, and which is usually invisible. And you see this zine in which they used fragments from the interviews they conducted, archival photos, and they made a kind of nice collage of it. There were also other zines devoted to the topic of translation, archives, and so on. So I would say that the results were really spectacular. So in brief, that was all about my presentation, and of course I'm looking forward to your questions. If you will have any, I will try to answer them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gabor, and congrats for this project, because it was really a lot of work, and I think like the outcomes might be really inspirational. And you know, it's even hard to present online designs, zines produced, because you know they are here in the office, but they are like in so many different formats, and that's so cool that you know that you've got them there.
I have some of them, but it would be it's one of the nice zine I mean,
You're blurred, like your background is blurred.
I have to change the settings probably somehow. If I find how to do
Yeah,
that.
you can find it. And there is a question to you, Martin, on the Q&A session. Do we know much about the impact of communism on faith, like a Catholic faith-based groups in Slovakia? Wait a second, and then coming back to Gabor. So, like, could you show us maybe, Gabor, just for a sec? Yeah.
This is one particular zine, which was about self-archives, and it seems like a little book, but there are some inserted materials in it about yeah, these are the like various materials the students found in the archives. So, for example, we have here the Animal Farm from Orwell. Yeah, some typewritten stuff. And probably I won't be able to discuss the whole concept of this zine, but it's possible to open it somehow. And the students came from various countries, so they choose a particular archive in each country they came from. And you see this red line which connects all of these archives, and each archive is somehow discussed in this particular zine. So yeah, this is really spectacular, and to be honest, I did not expect such kind of high level of zine making when we were working on this project.
Okay, so there's Gabor, there's one question to you from Ekaterina, actually two, because there's one from Helia too. And now getting back to Martin, could you reply to Barbara's question about the faith?
Yes, so the faith groups. So basically, faith and religion, I mean, was really important. It was very, very prevalent in Slovakia. And yeah, well, the church as a whole was basically the second biggest enemy of the regime officially. So they had to get rid of the monasteries. They had to basically imprison the nuns and the monks that were here. And so basically every denomination of the church, whether you are talking Protestant, whether you are talking Catholic, Greek Catholic, right, every denomination was affected in some way. In these, I'm not sure if you what you mean by specifically by faith-based groups, but basically what happened then is that as I said, right, you had these people who were imprisoned in, let's say, late 50s. They are just about coming from prison, and they start in late 70s, early 80s. They are creating these small groups, communities in Bratislava mostly, and then the students then come back to these their own cities or villages, and they create their own faith-based communities, right? They are secret, so they have to be really figurative, really underground, I would say. And then each one of them had a different basically different focus group, let's say, right? So there are some faith-based groups that dealt with families. There are some that dealt with young people. Some of them dealt with how to grow old. There was actually one group that mainly focused on the retirees, right? So yeah, but these faith group, of course, as I said, which is a bit of a shame, after 1990, these faith-based groups basically disappeared because there was no need for them anymore. Some of them survived, let's say, but only for a couple of years, and then the official church actually took over their kind of importance and their focus groups. So there was no really need for like these small communities, these small groups. Right? But they still meet. They are, of course, in their 60s, 70s now, but they still meet. They remember these really nice period of their life for them. So.
Thank you. Thank you. There was also a comment on Barbara in Q&A that good to see that the invisibility of women was dealt with, like through the Samizdat about Havlova. Okay, Gabor.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara, for this comment. Yeah, it was our aim, to give the floor to the students, and give them the opportunity to discuss the topics which they were interested in the most. And I was really happy that they choose this kind of gender aspect or gender approach to the dissident movements, which is, I think, still under-researched, and we should speak about it. And I saw on the chat that I got a question from Ekaterina about the international cooperation. How did it go? I would say that it was a huge, big challenge on each level and each stage of the project itself. So we had to implement on each level various stuff to enable the good group dynamics and to let this project happen in a proper way. And for example, we conducted a very, very carefully planned recruitment process. At the beginning, we received almost 300 applications from students. So first we selected these applications and invited 40 persons for interviews. And then we choose the half of them. Like we could take unfortunately, only 20 students to these study visits. But we try to create really heterogeneous group of students. We try to choose the students which we saw that they were able to work in a larger group. And we also try to create very heterogeneous groups in a sense that we picked up students with various backgrounds. So we had students which were interested in journalism or human rights or sociology or history, or they had some artistic skills and they were very much into visual art and so on. So it was really, really heterogeneous group of people. And the basic language, the common language was English, of course, which meant that we also had to pre-select some documents in the archives and translate them beforehand, that they can be available for everyone. And in each group, there were people who spoke the local languages of this archive. So when we created the Prague group, there were like 3 persons who spoke Czech and Slovak languages, and there were others who spoke like German, Hungarian, and other Ukrainian language. And of course, we try to pre-select archival documents according to their language skills, that they can also use their native language to make these researches in the archives, but in the same time cooperate in English with the others. We also try to integrate the students, so we very carefully planned the first day when they met. So we organized a whole integration session for them. And I can say that we succeeded. It was very time-consuming approach to select the proper people, but we managed it fortunately. So our 2 groups, they were like wonderful people, really wonderful students.
Thank you very much, Gabor. We need to wrap it up. First of all, I would like to thank you, Martin, very much for the really inspiring presentation and like a very, I would say, important message you conveyed, because it wasn't only about the history, it was very much about the nowadays and like this really urge to tell the truth. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you as well.
And thank you, Gabor, for presenting the project. And like it really gave us this feeling that we weren't there, but we had this a little bit of the vibe of the project. So 2 things. Firstly, wait for my email and think about and plan a lesson on Samizdat. We're very curious about the outcomes and your ideas. let's exchange. Secondly, I sent on chat a form for the next webinar. I already see 5 of you registered. Thank you very much. So we see each other on 18th of November. This is very much connected to the anniversary of 11th of November, so the end of the First World War. And we're gonna cover this topic. We're gonna focus on children's perspective because the researchers, we have the presenter, she's gonna speak about the consequences of First World War to children. So I think it's gonna be really interesting for all of you. And yeah, if you would like to stay in touch, just write us an email. And again, thank you very much and have a nice evening.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you.